Hi, I'm Deborah. 2 weeks ago, I found my 8-month-old daughter Emma convulsing in her high chair after eating baby food my own mother had prepared. While I was screaming for help, Patricia stood behind me with this satisfied expression and whispered, "Maybe now you'll understand what real sacrifice looks like." What she didn't know was that my husband Ryan wasn't just stationed overseas, he was commanding a specialized reconnaissance unit with access to resources she never could have imagined. When that emergency call reached him during Emma's surgery, everything changed. By morning, my mother was facing federal agents, and a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military contracting was about to be exposed. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning fog rolled off San Diego Bay like a gray blanket, muffling the sounds of the naval base where Ryan had been stationed before his deployment. I stood at the kitchen window of our small apartment in Coronado, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of amber and gold, while Emma babbled contentedly in her bouncer behind me. At 8 months old, she had Ryan's dark hair and my blue eyes, with a smile that could melt the heart of anyone who saw it. The apartment felt too quiet without Ryan's presence. He'd been deployed for 4 months now, somewhere in Eastern Europe that he couldn't name, in a position he couldn't describe. All I knew was that he commanded a specialized unit and that his work was classified at levels that made normal military wives' complaints about communication seem trivial. We'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and I still sometimes felt like I was dating a stranger who happened to wear the same face as the man I'd fallen in love with. But Emma made everything worthwhile. She was my anchor in a world that often felt untethered, my constant companion in a life that revolved around deployment schedules and security clearances. Every morning, I'd give her breakfast while telling her about her daddy, showing her pictures on my phone, playing the voice messages he'd managed to send through secure channels. She'd reach for the screen with tiny fingers, as if she could somehow touch the father she barely remembered. The knock on my door that Tuesday morning came at exactly 9:15, just as I was settling Emma down for her morning nap. Through the peephole, I could see my mother Patricia standing on the doorstep, holding a canvas bag and wearing the kind of smile that always made my stomach clench with anxiety. She looked immaculate as always, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expensive pantsuit pressed and coordinated with jewelry that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Patricia had a talent for arriving unannounced at the worst possible moments, armed with criticism disguised as concern and solutions to problems I didn't know I had. Since Emma's birth, these visits had become more frequent and more pointed, each one carrying the underlying message that I was failing as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, brushing past me into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume, something French and overpowering, immediately filled the small space. "You look exhausted. When's the last time you slept through the night?" I closed the door and turned to face her, already feeling that familiar defensiveness rising in my chest. "Emma's been sleeping better lately. Last night was just a rough one." Patricia set her bag on the coffee table and surveyed the room with the expression she'd worn when I was a child, and she was cataloging my failures. Toys scattered across the floor, baby blankets draped over chairs, the general chaos that came with caring for an infant while managing a household alone. "I can see that," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that managed to be both sympathetic and condescending. She settled onto the couch with practiced elegance, crossing her legs and folding her hands in her lap like she was posing for a magazine photo. Everything about Patricia was calculated for maximum impact, from her posture to her vocal inflection to the way she timed her silences for dramatic effect. She'd built a successful career in pharmaceutical sales using these same techniques, convincing doctors to prescribe medications they didn't necessarily believe in to patients who didn't necessarily need them. "Ryan's been gone for 4 months now," she continued, "and from what I can see, you're drowning. Emma deserves better than a mother who's barely keeping her head above water." The criticism landed exactly where she'd aimed at, hitting the insecurities I'd been trying to ignore for weeks. Was I giving Emma everything she needed? Was I doing enough to stimulate her development, to provide the kind of enriching environment that would help her thrive? The parenting books I'd read before her birth all seemed to assume you had a partner to share the load, a support system that extended beyond military wives who were dealing with their own deployment challenges. "I'm managing fine," I said, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Are you?" Patricia leaned forward, her expression shifting to what she probably thought looked like maternal concern. "Because what I'm seeing is a young woman who's isolated, overwhelmed, and making decisions that could have serious consequences for her child's well-being." Emma chose that moment to start fussing from her bedroom, the soft whimpering that usually preceded a full crying session. I excused myself to check on her, grateful for a moment away from Patricia's penetrating stare. Emma was awake in her crib, her face flushed from sleep, reaching up when she saw me with the automatic trust that babies reserve for their primary caregivers. "Hey, beautiful girl," I whispered, lifting her against my chest and feeling her immediately relax into the familiar comfort of my arms. "Did you have a good nap?" When I returned to the living room with Emma, Patricia was examining the contents of her canvas bag, pulling out small jars and containers with the kind of deliberate movements that suggested she'd been planning this moment for some time. "I brought something for you," she said, arranging the items on the coffee table like she was setting up a display. "A friend of mine works in pediatric nutrition research, and she's been developing some incredible products for babies Emma's age. Organic, all-natural supplements that can help with everything from cognitive development to immune system support." I looked at the jars, each one labeled with professional-looking stickers that included ingredient lists and batch numbers. They appeared legitimate, the kind of high-end baby food that sold for premium prices in specialty stores. But something about the way Patricia was presenting them made me uncomfortable, like she was a salesperson working toward a commission rather than a grandmother offering help. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but Emma's pediatrician has her on a specific feeding schedule. I'd need to check with Dr. Martinez before introducing anything new." Patricia's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly. Dr. Martinez is a perfectly competent pediatrician for routine care, but these products represent cutting-edge research in infant nutrition, the kind of advances that most doctors won't hear about for years. She picked up one of the jars and read from the label with the practiced fluency of someone who'd memorized a sales pitch. "This one contains omega-3 fatty acids specifically formulated for developing neural pathways, plus probiotics that support digestive health and immune function. It's completely natural, completely safe, and it could give Emma advantages that will benefit her for the rest of her life." Emma squirmed in my arms, reaching for the colorful jars with the curiosity that drew her to any new object. I bounced her gently, trying to process what Patricia was really offering and why every instinct I had was telling me to decline. "The thing is, Deborah," Patricia continued, her voice taking on that intimate tone she used when she was about to deliver what she considered profound wisdom, "you have an opportunity here to give Emma something special, something that most babies don't get access to because their mothers either can't afford it or don't know it exists." She opened one of the jars and showed me the contents, a smooth puree that looked like any other organic baby food I might buy at the grocery store. One jar, mixed with her regular food, just once a day, could make a significant difference in her development. Better sleep patterns, improved cognitive function, stronger immune responses. I stared at the jar, trying to understand why Patricia was pushing so hard for something that should have been a simple gift between grandmother and granddaughter. In the past, her visits had been about criticism and control, not about offering expensive supplements that promised to enhance Emma's development. "Why now?" I asked. "You've never shown much interest in Emma's nutrition before." Something flickered across Patricia's face, too quickly for me to identify, before her expression settled back into practiced concern. "I've always been interested in Emma's well-being, but I wanted to wait until she was old enough to benefit from more advanced nutrition. 8 months is the perfect age to introduce these kinds of supplements." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the naval base in the distance where Ryan should have been working if he wasn't halfway around the world fighting battles I couldn't imagine. "You know, I remember when you were Emma's age. Your father was deployed more often than he was home, and I was trying to manage everything on my own. I made mistakes, Deborah. I missed opportunities to give you advantages that might have made your life easier." The admission was so unlike Patricia that it caught me off guard. She rarely acknowledged weakness or failure, rarely admitted that her parenting had been anything less than exemplary. For her to suggest that she'd made mistakes with me represented a level of vulnerability I'd never seen from her before. "I don't want you to have the same regrets I do," she continued, still facing the window. "I don't want you to look back in 20 years and wonder what Emma might have achieved if you'd been brave enough to give her every possible advantage." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The manipulation was subtle but effective, playing on the fears that every parent carries about whether they're doing enough for their children. Was I being overly cautious? Was my reluctance to try Patricia's supplements based on legitimate concerns about Emma's health? Or was it just stubbornness born from years of tension between us? Emma had fallen asleep in my arms again, her small body warm and trusting against my chest. She was healthy, meeting all her developmental milestones, growing steadily according to the charts in Dr. Martinez's office. But what if Patricia was right? What if these supplements could give Emma advantages that would benefit her throughout her life? "I'll think about it," I said finally, though every maternal instinct I had was screaming warnings I couldn't quite articulate. Patricia turned back from the window, her smile returning with renewed brightness. "That's all I ask, but don't think too long. The optimal window for this kind of nutritional intervention is narrow. Wait too long, and you miss the opportunity entirely." She gathered her purse and headed toward the door, leaving the jars arranged on my coffee table like small soldiers waiting for orders. "I'll check on you both in a few days, see how Emma's responding to the supplements." After she left, I sat on the couch for a long time, holding my sleeping daughter and staring at the jars Patricia had left behind. The apartment felt different somehow, like the air pressure had changed while she'd been here. Emma stirred against my chest, making the soft sounds that meant she was dreaming, and I wondered what kind of dreams an 8-month-old baby could have. The following morning brought Emma's worst night in weeks. She had been restless since Patricia's visit, rejecting her usual foods and crying with a sound that seemed different from her normal fussiness. By 3 a.m., I was walking the halls of our small apartment, bouncing her gently while she whimpered against my shoulder with what seemed like genuine discomfort. Dr. Martinez's after-hours line had been busy when I'd tried calling around midnight, and the automated system kept directing me to call 911 if it was a true emergency. But Emma wasn't running a fever, wasn't showing signs of serious illness, just seemed miserable in a way that made my maternal instincts go into overdrive. I found myself standing in the living room at dawn, staring at the jars Patricia had left on the coffee table. The morning light streaming through the windows made the labels look even more professional, more legitimate. Everything about them suggested quality and safety, from the organic certification symbols to the detailed nutritional information printed in small, precise text. Emma had finally fallen asleep around 5 a.m., exhausted from hours of crying, and was now resting peacefully in her crib. I'd managed maybe an hour of sleep myself before she woke up again, this time with the hungry cry that meant she was ready for breakfast. As I prepared her usual oatmeal, I kept glancing at Patricia's supplements. What if my mother was right? What if Emma's discomfort was related to nutritional deficiencies that these advanced supplements could address? The crying, the restless sleep, the way she'd been rejecting some of her favorite foods lately. Maybe it was her body's way of telling me she needed something more than basic baby food could provide. I opened one of the jars and examined the contents. The puree looked identical to the organic baby food I bought at the grocery store, maybe slightly smoother in texture, with a pleasant aroma that suggested fruits and vegetables. The ingredient list read like something from a premium health food brand: organic sweet potato, organic carrot, omega-3 enriched fish oil, probiotics, vitamins, minerals. Before I could second-guess myself further, I mixed a small spoonful into Emma's morning oatmeal. Less than the recommended amount on the label, just enough to see how she responded. If it was really just advanced nutrition as Patricia claimed, it shouldn't cause any problems. Emma ate the mixture eagerly, finishing her entire bowl with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for food in days. Afterward, she seemed more content, playing quietly in her bouncer while I tidied the kitchen and tried to shake the lingering anxiety about trying something new without consulting her pediatrician first. The next few hours passed normally. Emma napped well, woke up happy, played with her toys while I managed some household tasks that had been piling up during her fussy period. I was beginning to think Patricia had been right about the supplements when everything changed. I was feeding Emma her lunch around noon when she suddenly stopped eating and stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Her eyes seemed unfocused, like she was looking through me rather than at me, and her breathing became rapid and shallow. Emma, I reached out to touch her forehead, checking for fever, but her skin felt normal. What's wrong, baby girl? She made a sound that wasn't quite crying, more like a whimper of confusion. Then her small body went rigid in the high chair. Her arms and legs extended stiffly, her back arched, and her eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible. Time seemed to slow as I realized what I was witnessing. Emma was having a seizure, her perfect little body convulsing in ways that no baby should ever experience. Foam appeared at the corners of her mouth, and her lips began turning a shade of blue that sent pure terror racing through my veins. I snatched her from the high chair, her body hot and trembling against my chest, and ran for the phone. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911, and when the dispatcher answered, I could barely form coherent words. My baby is having a seizure. She's 8 months old. She was fine this morning, and now she's convulsing, and I don't know what to do. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, guiding me through steps to keep Emma safe while the ambulance was en route. Turn her on her side, don't restrain the seizure, clear her airway, stay on the line. I followed the instructions mechanically while my mind raced through everything that had happened since morning. The oatmeal, the supplement I'd mixed into her breakfast, Patricia's insistence that these products were safe, natural, beneficial. The timing couldn't be coincidental. When the paramedics arrived, they worked with swift efficiency, starting an IV in Emma's tiny arm and checking her vital signs while asking rapid-fire questions about her medical history and anything she might have been exposed to. "Any new foods or medications?" one of them asked, while his partner prepared equipment I recognized from my brief stint as a nursing student before I'd met Ryan. "There was something," I said, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. "My mother brought some nutritional supplements yesterday. I gave Emma a small amount this morning mixed with her oatmeal." The lead paramedic's expression sharpened immediately. "Do you still have the container?" I nodded, running to the kitchen and grabbing the jar I'd opened that morning. When I handed it to him, I saw something pass between the two paramedics, a look that made my blood turn to ice water. "We need to get her to Children's Hospital immediately," the senior medic said. "This appears to be acute poisoning." The word poisoning hit me like a physical blow. I watched them load my unconscious daughter into the ambulance, her tiny body dwarfed by adult-sized medical equipment, and felt my entire world shift on its axis. Patricia hadn't brought supplements to help Emma develop better. She'd brought poison disguised as nutrition, and I'd fed it to my own child. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of sirens and medical terminology I only half understood. Emma remained unconscious, her breathing supported by a small oxygen mask that covered most of her face. I held her hand and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that she'd be okay, that Mommy would fix this, that Daddy would come home soon. At Children's Hospital, they rushed Emma into the pediatric intensive care unit, while I stood helplessly in a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and fear. Through glass windows, I could see a team of doctors and nurses working to stabilize her condition, checking monitors and adjusting equipment with the kind of urgent precision that suggested how serious her situation was. A nurse brought me paperwork to fill out, questions about insurance and emergency contacts and medical history. When I reached the section asking for Emma's father's contact information, I realized I was about to make a call that would change everything. Ryan's emergency contact protocols were something he'd explained during our last secure video call, when he'd seemed more serious than usual about making sure I understood the procedures. "If something happens, Deb, Anything that requires immediate response, you call Commander Peterson at the base. He has authorization codes that can reach me anywhere in the world, no matter what I'm doing or where I am. I'd asked what could possibly happen that would require that level of emergency response, and Ryan had just smiled grimly and said, "Hopefully nothing, but if it does, you'll know when to use it." Now I know. I found Commander Peterson's number in my phone and dialed with shaking fingers. It rang twice before a crisp military voice answered. "Commander Peterson." "Commander, this is Deborah Walsh, Ryan Walsh's wife. I need to reach my husband immediately. It's a family emergency involving our daughter." There was a brief pause. "Ma'am, I'll need you to verify your identity with your husband's authorization code." The code Ryan had made me memorize, the one he'd said was for absolute emergencies only. I'd never imagined I'd need to use it. "Charlie 97, Alpha," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Another pause, longer this time. When Commander Peterson spoke again, his tone had shifted completely. "Mrs. Walsh, what's the nature of the emergency?" "Someone poisoned my baby. She's in intensive care at Children's Hospital. I need Ryan to come home." "Ma'am, I'm going to put you on secure hold while I initiate emergency contact protocols. This may take some time, but I will reach your husband tonight. Can you stay on this line?" "Yes," I whispered, sinking into a plastic chair in the hospital corridor. "I'll wait." 30 minutes later, Ryan's voice came through the phone, distorted by satellite connection, but unmistakably his. "Deb, what happened? Are you and Emma okay?" I told him everything: Patricia's visit, the supplements, Emma's seizure, the diagnosis of acute poisoning. I told him about the doctors who were still working to determine exactly what compound had caused Emma's condition, about the way the paramedics had reacted when they saw the jar. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd lost connection. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice had changed into something I'd never heard before. Cold, controlled, absolutely lethal. "Deborah, I need you to listen very carefully. Are you somewhere private where you can talk freely?" I looked around the hospital corridor. A few other families were dealing with their own crises, but no one was paying attention to me. "Yes. First, Emma is going to be okay. We're going to make sure of that. Second, I need you to preserve everything Patricia brought to the house. Don't let anyone handle those containers except the medical team. They're evidence now." "Evidence?" The word sent a chill through me. "Ryan, what are you going to do?" "I'm coming home, Deb. But before I do, there are some protocols I need to activate, some resources I need to put in motion." His voice got even colder. "Your mother made a very serious mistake when she decided to poison my daughter. She's about to learn what happens when you threaten a military commander's family." The next 12 hours felt like living in someone else's nightmare. Emma remained unconscious in the pediatric ICU, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed with electronic vigilance. Dr. Sarah Kim, the pediatric toxicologist who'd taken over Emma's care, had identified the compound that caused the seizure, a synthetic alkaloid that had no legitimate medical use and certainly didn't belong in baby food. "We've never seen this particular substance in a pediatric case," Dr. Kim explained during her morning rounds, her voice gentle but concerned. "It appears to be designed to cause neurological distress while mimicking symptoms that could be attributed to natural causes. Whoever formulated this knew exactly what they were doing." I sat beside Emma's hospital bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, trying to process the doctor's words. Patricia hadn't just given Emma contaminated food by accident. She'd deliberately poisoned my daughter with a compound that was specifically engineered to cause harm while appearing innocent. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Walsh, this is Agent Rodriguez from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Commander Walsh has requested immediate family protection protocols. I'm in the hospital lobby. Can you meet me in the family conference room on the 3rd floor?" NCIs. Ryan hadn't just called in emergency leave. He'd triggered federal law enforcement protocols that I didn't even know existed. I kissed Emma's forehead and told the nurse I'd be back in a few minutes, then took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Agent Rodriguez was a woman in her 40s with short black hair and the kind of alert posture that suggested years of military or law enforcement training. She wore a simple gray pantsuit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it contained more than just paperwork. Mrs. Walsh, thank you for meeting with me. I know this is an incredibly difficult time for your family. She gestured to a chair across from her at the small conference table. Commander Walsh has briefed me on the situation, and I need to gather some information about yesterday's events. I walked her through Patricia's visit, describing every detail I could remember about the supplements, the conversation, the way my mother had behaved. Agent Rodriguez took notes on a tablet, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or specific words Patricia had used. Has your mother ever shown unusual interest in Emma's nutrition before? She asked. Never. She barely paid attention to Emma at all until yesterday. She'd visited maybe 3 times since Emma was born, and usually complained about babies being too noisy or disruptive. Agent Rodriguez nodded, making another note. What about her work? Has she ever mentioned having access to nutritional supplements or pharmaceutical products outside her normal job responsibilities? I thought about Patricia's career in pharmaceutical sales, the way she'd presented the supplements with such professional confidence. She works for Morrison Pharmaceuticals, mainly selling pain management drugs to doctors and hospitals. But she acted like she had connections to pediatric nutrition research that I'd never heard her mention before. We're looking into Morrison Pharmaceuticals now, Agent Rodriguez said. Preliminary investigation suggests they don't manufacture any infant nutrition products. Whatever your mother brought to your house, she sourced it through other channels. The implications of that statement hit me like a cold wave. Patricia hadn't simply grabbed some samples from her workplace. She'd gone to considerable effort to obtain substances that were specifically designed to harm Emma. There's something else you need to know, Agent Rodriguez continued, opening her briefcase and pulling out a file folder. This isn't the first case we've seen involving this particular compound. In the past 18 months, there have been 3 other incidents involving infants who were poisoned with the same synthetic alkaloid. She spread out photographs and case summaries on the table. 3 babies, all between 6 and 10 months old, all who'd suffered similar neurological episodes after eating food that had been provided by trusted family members or caregivers. 2 of these children died, Agent Rodriguez said quietly. 1 survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. Emma is the 4th case we've identified, and the first where we've been able to connect the poisoning to a specific individual with sufficient evidence to build a prosecution. I stared at the photographs, seeing innocent faces that would never grow up, families that had been destroyed by someone's deliberate cruelty. You think Patricia has done this before? We're investigating that possibility. The other cases involved different geographical locations, different family dynamics, but the same compound and similar methods of delivery. It's possible we're looking at a pattern of behavior that extends beyond your family. Agent Rodriguez gathered the photographs and put them back in the folder. Commander Walsh's emergency protocols have given us authorization to conduct a comprehensive investigation into your mother's activities, her financial records, her travel history, her communications. We're treating this as a potential case of serial poisoning with national security implications. National security? When someone attempts to harm the child of a military commander with access to classified operations, it raises questions about whether this could be an attempt to compromise or manipulate military personnel. We have to investigate the possibility that your mother was working with foreign agents or domestic terrorist organizations. The idea that Patricia might be connected to some larger conspiracy seemed almost absurd, but Agent Rodriguez's expression was completely serious. My mother, who complained about the cost of organic groceries and spent her weekends gardening, potentially involved with terrorists or foreign agents? I don't think she's smart enough or connected enough for something like that, I said. You're probably right, but the protocols don't care what we think is likely. They care about eliminating any possibility of a threat to military families and sending a clear message that such attacks will be met with overwhelming response. Agent Rodriguez's phone buzzed with a message, and she glanced at it with what looked like satisfaction. Your mother just used her credit card at a pharmacy in Chula Vista. She purchased hydrogen peroxide, activated charcoal, and several over-the-counter medications that could be used to treat poisoning symptoms. She's trying to cover her tracks? or preparing to treat herself if she accidentally ingested some of the same compound she gave Emma. Either way, it's evidence of consciousness of guilt. She knows exactly what she did, and she's taking steps to protect herself from the consequences. The conference room door opened. A man in a naval uniform entered. He was tall and lean, with graying hair, and the kind of bearing that suggested high rank and significant responsibility. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm Admiral Thompson, Commander Walsh's superior officer. I wanted to speak with you personally about the resources we're bringing to bear on this investigation." Agent Rodriguez stood and saluted, which Admiral Thompson acknowledged with a nod before sitting down across from me. "Your husband is one of our most valuable intelligence assets," he said without preamble. "His work involves operations that are critical to national security, which means threats against his family are treated as threats against the United States military. We're not just investigating a case of child endangerment here, we're responding to what could be an act of domestic terrorism." I felt like I was being swept along by forces much larger than my ability to comprehend. 12 hours ago, I'd been a worried mother dealing with a family crisis. Now, I was apparently at the center of a federal investigation involving NCIs, military intelligence, and national security protocols. What does that mean for Emma, for our family? It means your daughter is going to receive the best medical care available anywhere in the world. It means your mother is going to face the full consequences of her actions under both civilian and military law. And it means your family will be under federal protection until we're certain there are no additional threats. Admiral Thompson leaned forward, his expression becoming more personal. "Mrs. Walsh, I've known your husband for 6 years. He's conducted operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, and I've never seen him request emergency extraction for anything. When he called last night, he used authorization codes that are reserved for threats to critical national security assets. I don't understand. Your husband has access to intelligence that could compromise operations involving thousands of military personnel. If someone wanted to extract that information from him, threatening his family would be one of the most effective methods. We have to assume that your mother's attack on Emma could be part of a larger operation to manipulate or control Commander Walsh." The room went quiet, except for the distant sounds of hospital activity in the corridors outside. I thought about Patricia's visit, trying to remember anything that might suggest she was working with others or pursuing goals beyond simple cruelty. "She seemed like she was acting alone," I said finally. "Everything about her behavior was consistent with the way she's always treated me, like she was jealous of my happiness and wanted to destroy it." "That's probably exactly what this is," Agent Rodriguez said, "but we have to investigate every possibility, and we have to respond as if this were the most serious threat imaginable. That's how we protect military families and maintain operational security." Admiral Thompson stood up, smoothing his uniform jacket. "Commander Walsh's transport will arrive at North Island Naval Air Station at 0600 tomorrow. He'll be debriefed on the investigation and then brought here to the hospital. In the meantime, Agent Rodriguez will coordinate with hospital security to ensure Emma's safety." After they left, I returned to Emma's room and found her awake for the first time since the seizure. She looked up at me with those bright blue eyes, and for a moment it was like nothing had changed. She was still my perfect baby girl, still trusting and innocent and completely dependent on me to keep her safe. But everything had changed. Patricia's attack had triggered something much larger than a family dispute. Federal agents were investigating my mother as a potential terrorist. Military resources were being deployed to protect my family. And somewhere in Eastern Europe, Ryan was probably preparing to leave whatever critical mission he'd been conducting to come home and deal with the woman who'd tried to murder his daughter. I picked up Emma carefully, mindful of her IV lines, and held her against my chest while she babbled softly. Outside her window, I could see the San Diego skyline in the distance, the city where I'd thought we were building a safe, quiet life far from the dangers Ryan faced in his military career. Now I understood that the real danger had been sitting at my coffee table, wearing my mother's face and offering help that was actually a carefully planned attack on everything I loved most in the world. Ryan arrived at the hospital just after sunrise, still wearing his combat fatigues from the transport flight. His face was a mask of controlled fury that I'd never seen before, and when he looked at Emma sleeping in her hospital bed, something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. This wasn't the gentle husband and father I'd married. This was a military commander who'd spent years learning how to neutralize threats to American interests. "How is she?" His voice was quiet, but I could hear the steel underneath. "Better. The doctors think she'll make a full recovery. They've identified the toxin and flushed most of it from her system." I stood up from the chair where I'd spent the night and felt his arms wrap around me with desperate strength. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted my instincts. I should never have given her anything Patricia brought." "This isn't your fault," he said firmly, pulling back to look at me. "You were being a good mother, trying to help your daughter. Patricia exploited back trust because she's a predator who understands how to manipulate people's protective instincts." He walked to Emma's bedside and touched her small hand with infinite gentleness. She stirred at his touch, opening her eyes and looking up at him with recognition that made my heart ache. Even after 4 months of deployment, she knew her father. "Hey there, princess," he whispered. "Daddy's home now. Nobody's going to hurt you again." Agent Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, carrying a tablet and looking like she'd been awake for as many hours as I had. "Commander Walsh, I'm Agent Rodriguez. We spoke on the secure line last night." Ryan straightened, shifting into military mode. "Agent Rodriguez, what's the current status of the investigation?" "We've been monitoring your mother-in-law's activities since yesterday evening. She's made several moves that suggest she's aware the poisoning has been discovered and is taking steps to distance herself from the crime." She opened her tablet and showed us a timeline of Patricia's movements. After leaving the pharmacy in Chula Vista, she'd driven to 3 different locations: a storage unit facility, a FedEx office, and a bank branch where she'd accessed her safety deposit box. "We believe she's disposing of evidence and possibly preparing to flee the area. She purchased a one-way airline ticket to Phoenix this morning using a credit card we weren't monitoring. The flight leaves in 6 hours." Ryan studied the information with the tactical mindset that had made him successful in military intelligence. "She's running. That's an admission of guilt, but it also means we're losing opportunities to gather evidence about her methods and possible accomplices." "Actually, we want her to run," Agent Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "Or, more accurately, we want her to think she's running while we control every aspect of her movement." She pulled up another screen showing surveillance footage from various locations around San Diego. "We have teams positioned at every location she's visited, every route she's likely to take to the airport, every person she might contact for help. When she makes her move, we'll be ready." "What about the storage unit?" I asked. "What do you think she put there?" "Based on thermal imaging and electromagnetic signatures, we believe it contains laboratory equipment and chemical supplies, possibly additional quantities of the compound she used to poison Emma, possibly materials for manufacturing other toxins." The implications sent a chill through me. Patricia hadn't just obtained poison from somewhere else. She'd been manufacturing it herself, probably for months or years, developing the capability to attack multiple targets. "There's something else," Agent Rodriguez continued. "We've been analyzing her financial records, and we've found payments to overseas suppliers that specialize in restricted chemical compounds. She's been building a sophisticated operation, not just acting on impulse." Ryan's expression grew even more grim. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 2 years, possibly longer. The payments started small, probably for research and experimentation, then increased in frequency and amount as she refined her methods." Agent Rodriguez showed us bank records displaying wire transfers to companies in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia, organizations that existed in legal gray areas where dangerous chemicals could be purchased without extensive oversight. "She's been planning this for years," I said, the reality of it making me feel sick. Emma wasn't her first target. She's been practicing, getting better at it. "That's our assessment," Agent Rodriguez confirmed. "The other poisoning cases we identified all occurred after she'd made significant purchases of chemical compounds. We think she was testing different formulations, different delivery methods, refining her approach until she felt confident enough to attack your family." Ryan walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot, his mind clearly working through strategic implications. Why us? Why Emma? If she's been doing this for years, why choose a target that would trigger this level of federal response? We think she didn't know the level of your security clearance or the resources that would be brought to bear if she attacked your family. To her, you were just another deployed military husband, far away and unable to provide immediate protection. Agent Rodriguez pulled up Patricia's communication records, showing months of research into military families in the San Diego area. She studied multiple targets, learning about deployment schedules, family situations, and vulnerabilities. Your family fit the profile she was looking for: isolated spouse, young child, limited local support system. But she made a critical miscalculation, Ryan said, turning back from the window. She assumed all military families have the same level of protection and response capability. She had no idea that attacking my daughter would trigger protocols normally reserved for threats against senior command staff. Agent Rodriguez nodded, which brings us to the operation we have planned for today. We want to let Patricia think she's successfully escaping while we document every step of her process. We want to see who she contacts, where she goes, what other resources she might be trying to protect. She showed us a detailed operational plan involving multiple surveillance teams, electronic monitoring, and coordination with law enforcement agencies in Arizona and other states where Patricia might flee. The goal is to let her lead us to the full extent of her operation before we close the net. If she's working with others, if she's part of a larger network, if she has additional targets planned, we need to know about it before we arrest her. Ryan studied the plan with professional interest. What's my role in this operation? We want you here, protecting your family, but we also want Patricia to believe she's succeeded in disrupting your military duties. If she thinks she's accomplished her goal of damaging your career or compromising your effectiveness, she might become overconfident and make mistakes. Emma chose that moment to wake up completely, looking around the room with alert curiosity. When she saw Ryan, she reached for him with both arms, making the soft sounds that meant she wanted to be held. Ryan lifted her carefully, mindful of the monitoring equipment, and she immediately relaxed against his chest with the absolute trust that children reserve for their parents. For a moment, the room was filled with the kind of ordinary family tenderness that Patricia had tried to destroy forever. "She looks good," Agent Rodriguez observed. "Dr. Kim says her neurological responses are completely normal, no signs of lasting damage." "She's strong," Ryan said, his voice filled with pride and protective fury, "stronger than the person who tried to hurt her." Agent Rodriguez's phone buzzed with an urgent message. She read it quickly, then looked up with satisfaction. Patricia just left her house with 2 suitcases and a large duffel bag. She's heading toward the airport, but taking an indirect route that suggests she's checking for surveillance. "Is she detecting your teams?" "No, but she's acting like someone who expects to be followed. Classic counter-surveillance behavior, probably learned from crime shows or internet research. She's actually making our job easier by confirming that she knows exactly what she's done and is actively trying to evade consequences." Ryan shifted Emma to one arm and picked up his phone. "I need to contact my unit, let them know I'm extending emergency leave. If this operation is going to take several days, I want to make sure my absence doesn't compromise ongoing missions." "Actually, that's already been handled," Agent Rodriguez said. "Admiral Thompson has classified your situation as a critical security incident. Your unit has been informed that you're dealing with a family emergency that has national security implications. Your absence is being treated as an operational necessity, not a personal matter." The weight of institutional support was both reassuring and overwhelming. Ryan's entire chain of command was treating Patricia's attack on Emma as an act of war against the United States military, bringing resources and authority that I couldn't have imagined existed. "What happens when you arrest her?" I asked. "What charges will she face?" Agent Rodriguez consulted her tablet. Federal charges include attempted murder, possession and distribution of restricted chemical compounds, conspiracy to commit terrorism, and several violations of laws designed to protect military families. State charges include child endangerment, assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit murder. How long could she go to prison? If convicted on all charges, she's looking at life without possibility of parole. The federal terrorism charges alone carry mandatory minimum sentences that would keep her locked up until she dies. Emma babbled softly against Ryan's chest, playing with the buttons on his uniform with the innocent curiosity that made everything she did seem miraculous. She had no idea that her survival had triggered an investigation involving multiple federal agencies, or that her grandfather's attack had exposed what appeared to be a sophisticated domestic terrorism operation. "There's one more thing," Agent Rodriguez said, her expression becoming more serious. "We've found evidence that Patricia has been researching other military missamlies, not just in San Diego, but at bases around the country. We think Emma might have been a test case for a larger operation targeting the children of military personnel." The room went completely quiet, except for Emma's soft babbling and the distant sounds of hospital activity. Patricia hadn't just tried to hurt my family out of personal spite. She'd been planning something much larger, something that could have affected dozens or hundreds of military families across the United States. "How many other children were at risk?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. "We're still analyzing her research, but we've identified at least 20 families that fit her target profile, all with deployed spouses, all with young children, all in locations where she could have gained access under the pretense of offering help or support." Agent Rodriguez closed her tablet and gathered her materials. "The operation begins in 2 hours. Patricia's flight to Phoenix is our deadline for determining whether she's working alone or part of a larger conspiracy. By tonight, we'll have answers about the full scope of what she was planning." Patricia never made it to the airport. At 2:47 p.m., she pulled into the parking lot of a seemingly abandoned warehouse in Otay Mesa, just miles from the Mexican border. Agent Rodriguez and her team had been tracking her every movement, but this destination wasn't on any of their predicted routes or target locations. "This wasn't in her research profile," Agent Rodriguez said through the secure communication device she'd given us at the hospital. "We have no record of her ever visiting this location or having any connection to the businesses in this area." Ryan and I watched the surveillance feed from the hospital family lounge, Emma sleeping peacefully in a portable crib that the nurses had brought in. The video showed Patricia sitting in her car for nearly 10 minutes, apparently making phone calls or sending text messages, before finally getting out with only a small handbag. "She's meeting someone," Ryan observed, his tactical training evident in how he analyzed her behavior. "The way she's moving, the way she keeps checking her surroundings, she's been here before, but not recently enough to be confident about the security situation." The warehouse appeared empty from the outside, with faded signage for a defunct import-export business and windows that had been painted black from the inside. But thermal imaging showed heat signatures indicating at least 3 people were already inside the building when Patricia arrived. "We're running the property records now." Agent Rodriguez's voice came through the comm device. "The building is registered to a shell company that traces back to a network of businesses involved in gray market chemical imports. This could be where she's been sourcing her compounds." Patricia disappeared through a side entrance, and for several minutes the surveillance team could only track the heat signatures moving inside the building. Then Agent Rodriguez's voice came back with urgency that made my blood run cold. "We've identified one of the people inside, Marcus Chen, former Army chemical weapons specialist who was dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for attempting to sell classified formulations to foreign buyers. He's been on a federal watch list since his discharge." Ryan's expression hardened. "What kind of classified formulations?" "Non-lethal incapacitating agents, primarily. Compounds designed to cause temporary neurological disruption without permanent damage. Exactly the kind of chemicals that could be used to poison children in ways that look like natural illness." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Patricia hadn't just been conducting random attacks on military families. She'd been working with someone who had professional expertise in chemical weapons, someone who could provide her with compounds that were specifically designed to avoid detection while causing maximum psychological trauma to the victims' families. "There's more," Agent Rodriguez continued. "We're tracking encrypted communications between the shell company that owns this warehouse and similar operations in Norfolk, Virginia, and Colorado Springs, Colorado. This appears to be a coordinated network targeting military installations across multiple states." Emma stirred in her crib, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up from her nap. I picked her up and held her close, trying to process the magnitude of what we were discovering. My mother hadn't just tried to kill my daughter out of personal spite. She'd been part of a domestic terrorism network that was systematically targeting the children of military personnel. How many families? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We're still analyzing the communications, but preliminary estimates suggest they've identified over 50 potential targets. Military families with deployed spouses, young children, limited local support systems. Exactly the profile that made your family attractive to Patricia. The surveillance feed showed Patricia emerging from the warehouse carrying a different bag than the one she'd brought in. She moved with more confidence now, like someone who just received instructions or resources that made her feel more secure about her situation. She's not fleeing, Ryan observed, watching her body language. She's transitioning to the next phase of whatever operation she's been planning. Agent Rodriguez's voice confirmed his assessment. She just received what appears to be a new cell phone and several documents. We're tracking her new destination, but based on the route she's taking, it looks like she's heading back toward Coronado. She's coming back to the base area? I felt a surge of panic. Why would she come back here? Because she thinks she's successfully completed the first part of her mission, Ryan said grimly. She poisoned Emma, disrupted our family, forced me to return from deployment under emergency conditions. From her perspective, she's proven that the security around military families can be penetrated. Agent Rodriguez's voice came through with new information that made my stomach drop. We've intercepted communications from the warehouse. They're planning coordinated attacks on military families at 3 different installations over the next 72 hours. Patricia's attack on Emma was apparently a field test for methods they intend to use on a much larger scale. Ryan stood up and began pacing, his mind working through the tactical implications. They're not just trying to hurt individual families, they're trying to demonstrate that military personnel can't protect their loved ones, that deployment leaves families vulnerable to attack. It's psychological warfare designed to undermine military readiness and morale. Emma was fully awake now, looking around the room with bright curiosity. She reached for Ryan when she saw him, and he took her from my arms with the gentle competence of a father who'd learned to be both protector and nurturer. "What happens now?" I asked. "How do you stop something like this?" Agent Rodriguez's response came through with the sound of multiple vehicles moving in the background. "We're moving to simultaneous raids on all known locations associated with this network. The warehouse in Otay Mesa, facilities in Virginia and Colorado, and any other sites we can identify from the communications we've intercepted." "What about Patricia? What about the immediate threat to our family?" "We're maintaining surveillance on her current location, but we're also implementing enhanced security protocols for your family and the other military families that have been identified as targets. This is now classified as an active terrorism investigation with national security implications." The weight of federal protection was both reassuring and terrifying. We were safe from immediate harm, but we were also at the center of something much larger and more dangerous than a family dispute gone wrong. Dr. Kim appeared in the doorway of the command center, still wearing her hospital scrubs after another night of monitoring Emma's recovery. "I have some good news," she said with a smile. "Emma's latest neurological tests show no residual effects from the poisoning. Her brain function is completely normal, and there's no reason to expect any long-term complications." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Emma would grow up healthy and normal, with no lasting damage from Patricia's attempt to destroy her life. "When can we take her home?" Ryan asked. "Today, if you want. She's been medically cleared for discharge. The only reason to keep her here would be security concerns, but I understand those have been addressed." Agent Rodriguez nodded. "Your family will remain under federal protection for the foreseeable future, but you can return to your normal routine. The immediate threat has been eliminated." We spent the rest of the morning completing paperwork and receiving briefings about the ongoing legal proceedings. Patricia would be charged under federal terrorism statutes, with prosecutors seeking life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Her co-conspirators faced similar charges, and the evidence against them was overwhelming. "What happens to us now?" I asked as we prepared to leave the command center. "How do we go back to normal life after something like this?" Admiral Thompson, who'd been coordinating with Pentagon officials throughout the operation, answered with the kind of directness that military leaders use when delivering important news. Commander Walsh, your actions during this crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and tactical thinking that we need in our most sensitive operations. When your current deployment cycle ends, you're being considered for promotion to a position that would keep you stateside for the next several years. Ryan's expression showed surprise and gratitude. Sir, I appreciate the consideration, but I don't want my family situation to impact my career trajectory. It's not about your family situation, Admiral Thompson replied. It's about your performance under pressure and your value as a strategic asset. The Pentagon has taken note of how you handled this crisis, and there are opportunities available that would benefit both your career and your family's stability. The drive home to Coronado felt surreal after a week of hospitals and command centers and federal investigations. Emma babbled happily in her car seat, reaching for toys and making the sounds that had become my favorite music in the world. She looked like any other healthy baby, with no external signs of the trauma she'd survived. Our apartment looked exactly the same as when we'd left it, but everything felt different. The kitchen where Patricia had placed her poisoned supplements was now just a kitchen again. The living room where she'd manipulated my maternal instincts was once again a safe space for our family. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was waiting on our doorstep with a casserole and a gentle smile. She was a Navy wife herself, married to a chief petty officer who understood the rhythms of deployment and homecoming. I heard there was some family trouble, she said diplomatically, handing me the warm dish. I thought you might need a home-cooked meal. It was exactly the kind of community support that military life bearable. Neighbors who offered help without asking intrusive questions, who understood that sometimes families faced challenges that couldn't be discussed openly. That evening, Ryan and I sat on our small balcony watching the sunset over San Diego Bay, while Emma played on a blanket between us. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and pink sky like a mirror, and for the first time in a week, I felt like I could breathe normally. Do you think she'll try to contact us from prison? I asked, thinking about Patricia's final threat in the hotel surveillance footage. I think she'll spend the rest of her life trying to convince herself that she was justified in what she did, Ryan replied. People like that don't usually accept responsibility or show genuine remorse. Emma rolled over and reached for her favorite stuffed elephant, the one she'd been playing with the morning Patricia brought the poison supplements. It seemed like months ago instead of just a week. I keep thinking about the other families, I said, the ones who lost their children and never knew it was murder. How do you recover from that kind of betrayal? I don't think you ever fully recover, Ryan said quietly, but maybe knowing the truth gives them permission to stop blaming themselves. Maybe it helps them redirect their anger toward the people who actually deserve it. My phone buzzed with a text message from Maria Santos, one of the other victims' mothers whom Agent Rodriguez had connected me with. Thinking of you and Emma today. Thank you for being strong enough to survive and expose the truth. Isabella's room has sunlight in it again. It was a simple message, but it carried the weight of closure that had been years in coming. Maria's daughter had been one of the first victims, killed when she was just 6 months old by compounds that Marcus Chen had provided to an associate of Patricia's network. The family had spent 3 years blaming themselves for Isabella's death. I want to stay in touch with them, I told Ryan, the other families. They shouldn't have to carry this alone. We can do that. Maybe organize support groups, advocacy efforts to prevent this kind of thing from happening to other military families. Emma chose that moment to pull herself up to a sitting position, a milestone she'd been working toward for weeks. She looked at us with enormous pride, clapping her hands at her own accomplishment. It was such a normal, joyful moment that for a second I forgot about everything else. She's going to be okay, Ryan said, watching our daughter celebrate her achievement. She's going to grow up strong and happy, and she'll never remember any of this. But we'll remember, I said. We'll remember how lucky we are, how precious this all is. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the same constellations that had guided travelers and families for thousands of years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal proceedings, therapy sessions, the ongoing work of rebuilding trust and security. But tonight, we were together and safe and grateful for the miracle of ordinary love continuing after extraordinary evil had tried to stop it. In the distance, I could hear the evening sounds of our neighborhood, children playing, families calling each other in for dinner, the gentle rhythm of community life that Patricia had tried to destroy. She'd failed, love had won, and Emma would grow up knowing that her parents would move heaven and earth to protect her, that sometimes the most dangerous enemies come from unexpected places, but that good people will always fight to keep children safe. 6 months later, I received a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons informing me that Patricia had been sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole on charges of domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit murder, and violations of chemical weapons statutes. She would spend the rest of her life in a maximum security facility with no possibility of contact with the families she'd tried to destroy. That same day, Emma took her first steps across our living room, walking from my arms to Ryan's with the determined concentration that she brought to every new challenge. She was perfect and healthy and completely unaware that her survival had helped save dozens of other military families from the same fate. We were home. We were safe, and we were finally free to build the future that Patricia had tried to steal from us forever. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.